Welcome to another episode of the Up Close podcast. I am Kweku Darfoor, and today we are joined by Kristin Campbell, a sports business lawyer with 40 SCG Group. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Kweku.
How are you?
I'm excellent. How about yourself? Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for joining us and coming on. You have a lot to share, a tremendous background, and I could go into all of the wonderful things you've done and the accolades you have, but I wanted to start out with just taking a look at like your background, and what you do is there's sometimes a traditional way and the non-traditional ways to kind of get involved and get into that area. So how can you kind of discuss to us how you got involved in it? Was it traditional or non-traditional?
So it's funny you introduce it that way because most things that I do are non-traditional, I would say. I'm very much a proponent of taking advantage of the moment. So I am a graduate of the Florida State University, and
Go Noles.
Go Noles. So after undergrad, I did not immediately go into law school. I worked in advertising for an agency in Tallahassee, and I worked in media buying and focused on hospitality properties. So I was kind of getting my chops wet, and prior to that, I think, I've always been interested in sports. I cheered, played softball, did, soccer. I was always involved, coming from Texas originally as well. Football is king. I know people in Florida might feel otherwise, in California.
It's a bit of a rivalry, right, between those three states?
But Friday Night Lights is definitely something that I grew up on. So whereas I might not have necessarily dreamt of a career in sports, I did have a desire to kind of focus more on, advertising marketing, which my major is international business and marketing. So worked for that advertising agency for a year, and in that time, my experience was with a husband and wife proprietorship that had built this company to about 30 individuals, and they were really successful. And so that kind of inspired me to go to law school, still not really with the idea of what kind of law that I was going to practice, but it was more, I knew it was going to be something transactional, right? Because I wanted to not just own my own business, but be astute in owning my own business. I figured, why not law school, right? So came down to South Florida, went to Nova Southeastern after that work experience, and honestly, that experience kind of messed me up in the sense that I always tell people, like, law school is the best torture. You probably can relate to that. Like that 1L year, I'm like, what is this? Like, why did I choose this? And honestly kind of lost myself because I thought, I guess I have to be like a traditional lawyer, even though I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur. So it took until about my third year again, and getting through those first 2 years and like surviving, I guess, and really trying to figure out, what am I doing here again? Because, 1L kicked my butt. And, I wasn't used to really struggling academically like I did in that first year, but, was able to bounce back, finish, pass the bar. And by that point, my first foray into law was in-house for an entertainment company. Okay. So at that time, I was doing like reality show deals, licensing, the transactional work that I had. And it was honestly, I think, my dream job in a sense, that I got to see how the soup was made, right? I love music. I love, I loved contracts. I loved reading a lot. So seeing how it actually worked in reality and what we were putting together, it was a daunting task in the beginning because like I said, I wasn't interning with with a company prior to that. I just kind of lucked up on this experience and took it from there. So my sports experience came as a result of being involved with this group in Miami, Liberty City Optimists. They had a documentary featured on them. After I guess I'd been involved close to a decade by that point, but. It's a youth program out of Liberty City in Miami, and they have, football is their thing. But part of the documentary, featured how so many young men that had gone on to the NFL had come from like a 5-mile radius around this park. And
it's a hotbed of talent, right?
It is like, Antonio Brown, Chad Ochocinco, Devontae Freeman, Duke Johnson, just to name a few.
You represented a couple of them, right?
A couple of them that, ended up being my clients. And so, but my first was a young man named T.Y. Hilton. And I had known him and his family for a long time and through that program. So,
so did you recruit him, or how did that come about?
So what happened was, like I said, I've known him since he was about 13. So by the time he'd gone to FIU, and he was, supposed to be a first-round draft pick. And so his mom called, and she's like, listen, we have all of these agencies. They're coming to my job. They're coming to the house. We don't know what to do. Can you help us?
Now, did he go through the program that you were talking about, or how did you
He actually came from Gwen Cherry, which was one of the rivals. But, his family was good friends with my family. So, like I said, they're a sports family. Like, everybody. Mom is athletic. Like, mom and dad play on a softball league together. Like, they are an athletic family. It runs in the genes. And let me just kind of caveat for a second. Like, I think that's so important. I think more so now, and I think that's part of his success, is that sports was not just a vehicle to this great, career option, which it ended up being for him, right? But it was what brought their family together. Like, sports was, something that they all resonated with and they could connect with, and kept them close. So like I said, I love to see that, and I love to work with families who, like I said, mom, dad, brother, sister, everybody has their sport, right? And can cheer each other on and be a part of it, especially when the parents are involved. But anyway, so I acted as counsel for them, and really it was a tremendous experience because I got to see how everyone recruited athletes. So the big agencies that were coming from New York, LA, Atlanta, I got a front row seat in what the process was. And it was during that time that I realized that, whereas I probably had a jaded sense that, okay, well, guys make all this money and blow it. It must be because of cars and homes and poor financial decisions. But in that experience, looking at these agreements, addendums to contracts that, TY was getting, I'm like, oh no, you guys are getting locked into, contracts.
Bad contracts?
That that with people that you're supposed to trust, right? Mm-hmm. People who are like are coming to your house and going, I'm going to take care of your son. I'm going to do right by them. But they have a business to run, right? And so they are saying that.
So are you saying that the people representing a lot of these athletes are going into negotiations looking at what they can gain versus what the athlete can gain?
Well, again, if you are coming out of college and you are a first-round pick, at that point, let's say, I think that a top 10, recruit is making $20 million, a year. That sounds great, right? Like, and you're 21, 22 years old.
And NFL contracts aren't guaranteed either, right?
And so at that time, like I said, first rounds were not, but first rounds had more guaranteed money than they do now. Because like we're talking almost 15 years ago, right? So there's been another CBA since that time. But then a rookie contract would have been substantially more guaranteed, but they're not fully guaranteed contracts. So yes, that is a distinction between NFL, NBA, MLB, NHL. Couldn't get that out. So for me, I'm looking at it and basically saying you can sign everything else, just do not sign these documents. And there was a real conversation and honestly some trepidation because it's like, well, will we ruin this relationship with this agent? And I had to remind them, you have the power here, right? Like these people are flying all across the country for your business. But it's imperative that you start looking at your business as a business, right? So not just the physical aspect of it, but what are you saying that you're going to owe beyond just the cost of negotiating a contract? And according to a lot of those agreements, there was more attached to it. So a lot of loan out agreements that they're like, what loan? And I'm like, well, according to this.
So is that paying back the agent for monies that they've advanced or spent on your behalf to
Correct.
get you ready?
Right. Well, those seem to be straightforward, right? So if I've paid for your training, I've paid for a car and housing while you're training. If it's not, close to where you live or where you go to school, then that seems like, okay, cost of doing business. But what I found is a lot of the expenses were recruiting expenses, things that I think the family believed that, oh, I thought they just gave that to me. I thought that was, just part, I thought I was special, right? And it's like you are until you leave. Until you're not satisfied with this. If you get to that point, if you're not satisfied with the performance.
So let me ask you this then, because, if they're being bombarded and, they're young, how should an athlete that's in college, that's sought after, go about choosing who the right agent? What should they look for?
So that, I was thinking about that. It kind of is, why did you go to the school that you went to? Now, again, that's changed these days with NIL and, people using NIL as a recruiting tool. But I think that you have to consider, one, what is your objective in the league? Like, remember, we're talking about the top 1% of college players, probably less than 1%, right? So I do believe that it just can't be, I want to get into the league, or even if it's, I want to be a first-round pick, finding someone that has experience with, dealing with first-round picks and navigating that experience, and understanding that when you have that sort of notoriety, there's not just the expectation that you're going to perform on day one, which I think most players welcome, right? But also that you are going to somewhat be the face of an organization. And what does that mean for you? Are you prepared for that? Do you feel prepared? Do you understand, not just the interview prep that is going to be necessary for things like Combine, but, just in building your brand as you are navigating the league? I think that that's something to consider. And also someone's track record in what happens towards the end, right? Your agent is essentially they're acting as like a COO of your company, right? The player is the CEO. I would say sometimes parents can be, VPs and have an input. But your agent, I would say, is kind of the CEO and helping you put together the most, robust representation of you when it comes to holding yourself out to these teams, but also to advertisers and marketers, and now these days, sometimes investment houses, right? Introducing you to financial advisors. Like, you're trusting that their Rolodex is deep enough for where you want to go. So, who do they know? Who do they know inside of football and outside of football, or whatever sport you're looking at?
In looking at that, then it sounds almost like the rich will get richer in terms of the agents. Are you suggesting that the players then should choose the agents that are already well known, and then where does that leave room for somewhat new agents or someone that is entering it to also be able to represent these type of players?
Yeah, I do. No, I'm not a proponent of that. You have to, the only way to succeed is through one of the big houses, right? Or one of the bigger agencies, because obviously there's people like myself that had, one player change the course of a career that I didn't honestly would think would happen, right? So I do think, but what I did have that was beneficial, I had two things. I had a client and I had some connections. So I would say that, no, if you're looking for someone, one, you want to find someone that you can trust, someone that is honest, someone that is speaking to you in a way that you understand, respects your opinion, respects, your vision for yourself, and you got to have that for yourself as well. And sometimes it's, if you don't know, that you trust that they have a track record of developing players from maybe, let's say that you're a 4th or 5th round projected pick, and they've developed those guys where they've become, a Tom Brady, and you're going, how can I become that? Because that's what you desire. I think that you want to seek out people that have that experience, because they're going to have a network that is going to be able to support that.
Right. And so you did also discuss, or not discuss, but mention NIL, and that's something that was not around, I guess,
correct,
when you first entered this business, right? How do you see that NIL changing the landscape for college athletes and entering or looking to go into the pros?
So NIL is exciting and scary at the same time, right? Because everyone is trying to figure out their grasp And like I said, I feel like we're peak capitalism right now. So everybody's like, how do I maximize it and exploit it? But so on one end, I look at it from, coaches and there are a lot of coaches that, express disdain for NIL, like because of how it's used, right? It's not supposed to be used as pay for play. Like NIL stands for name, image, likeness, right? And the idea behind it, the principle behind it is supposed to be, hey, player, we're not going to, if we pay you based upon your athletic ability, you'd probably be making more than coaches. Some of these players would, right? Because they just, again, you're now kind of entering into a player contract if that were the case. But instead, name, image, likeness says, no, we're not going to address that at this point. We're going to only address your brand, your marketing ability, your intellectual property, the name on the back of the jersey, why people are coming because they know, X quarterback goes to, this particular school, and we want to see how he develops. Because in all actuality, you have a high school career, maybe a youth football career or a youth sport career. I always default back to football because that's kind of, my bread and butter. But just in general, you're bringing some experience, but you're going to college to develop, right? So name, image, likeness is like, at least you got your name, at least you've got some notoriety, whether it's a 5-star coming out, you've got some, all-star games maybe you participated in, but you're going to be doing the bulk of it while you're here. But how do we allow you to make money? Because in all actuality, student athletes were the only class in college that was not able to make money while they're in college because of the amateur status that was attached to them playing.
Like if you're an art major, you can do your art and sell your art.
Correct.
If you're a photographer or whatever, you can take pictures and freelance and outside and sell that. But what in your belief, what was the underlying reason that student athletes could not financially benefit from their talent
while everyone else did?
While everybody else in the college did, including the school.
So when you go back historically and how this became a thing, you go back to Ed O'Banion that played for UCLA, and he basically was part of a suit against EA Sports. And so he's watched, this was when,
I remember that.
Those video games were brand new, right? And so football game, it's not what we have right now, but they had guys running up and down the court looking like the player, encapsulating their image and likeness on these video games. And EA Sports is making, hundreds of millions of dollars. And Ed is like, I don't have a penny, and that's me, right? So that court case, which I think started in 97, kind of, made its way through the circuit, but eventually didn't go anywhere. But as the case kind of evolved, and so the most recent iteration, which really led to NIL and kind of the end of amateur status for college athletes, was with Alston. It's the Alston case. And so, again, they took on the approach that, wait, why are we separating student athletes as a class that is unable to make money and not every other student athlete? So Supreme Court agreed, and so that kind of ushered in. So, like I said, the NCAA, what can you hold on to, right? How you can't hold on to not paying players something. Like I said, they have the right to make money, just like you described with, if they were an artist in college, they would be able to sell their pictures or whatever their art is. So, again, that just basically the idea that everyone else is able to do it. Why am I capped because I have a scholarship? Because that was essentially the NCAA's argument for so long. Well, you've got scholarships. You're getting these other intangible benefits by being a part of the athletic program.
And that's something a fallacy, because obviously your students that aren't athletes are also on scholarship, right?
Correct. Exactly. So that, again, their arguments kind of fell on deaf ears, and eventually it's like, yes, but you are specifically, excluding this class, and there's no justification because, again, that exclusion still applies to other students that are not student athletes. Right. So it's exciting for student athletes that are like, yes, I can finally kind of negotiate, my worth in going to these colleges. But even that recruiting process, right? And you asked about that from an agent standpoint, but from a university standpoint, why are you choosing to go to this school? Is it just because they are offering the most amount of money? For some students, that's a real consideration, right? They're leaving home. They are, they have families to take care of. And so the financial consideration is important, right? But I look at it also, what cannot be lost is that even if you're being recruited for money, understand there's a bigger landscape. You've got coaches that come and go. You just had a coach, Jimbo Fisher at Texas A&M, who had great hopes for this program, and had just signed an extension that would say he's going to be there forever, and was bought out of that extension, which was great for him.
Speaking of Jimbo, after what he did to our Florida State Seminoles, I digress. I guess.
You look at how much money it takes to put not just a program on, but beyond the travel and things like that. What does NIL and pay to play, or using NIL as a recruiting tool, what does that do? Not just for the larger programs, because I think in the short term they're ready to go. Right? They were positioned to be able to strike and be able to use the cash that they had to start funneling to players to get them there. And so, smaller schools are like, how do we compete?
Yeah. So speaking of that, right, like obviously NIL has changed the landscape, and some schools don't know how to adjust or haven't adjusted, and some have taken hold and run with it. But from an athlete standpoint, how can they best prepare themselves and position themselves to take advantage of the NIL landscape?
Number one, take advantage of free assets on campus, right? So I believe branding is important. You've got to figure out not just what your brand is on the field. Your strength and conditioning coach is going to figure that out, and your position coach is going to figure out what type of wide receiver or running back you're going to be. But off the field, what does your brand encapsulate? You're more than just a star athlete, right? You're more than just a student athlete. You probably have interest, outside of just sports, right? And how are you able to package that so people are drawn to you and are going to continue to buy things from you when that college experience is done? So, partnering with the marketing department, right? Or finding a professor, or there's probably a class that I had a class at Florida State that we had to do SWOT analysis and things like that, finding that person that's like, make me your project, right? Or taking that class. Shaquille O'Neal talks about taking a class and a marketing class, and he did himself. Like he was the brand. Mm-hmm. And I think he got a C or D on it, which I'm sure he's going back to that professor and going, so how did that work out for you, right? But I think that was so smart, right? Because he knew at that point, and look at, again, he was intentional then, and he's intentional now about, I am the Shaq brand, and this is what that means, right? And it evolved beyond just basketball. He took advantage of his larger than life stature and persona. So, like I said, but that happens with school, and again, it's free. You can take the class already, because again, that scholarship still exists, and so it's being paid for. Or you can, which is my next thing, network. Find individuals in the sports management program, find individuals in the business program, find just people in clubs that you have an interest in, and get to know people, because people want to get to know you. And aligning yourself with similarly situated people when it comes to mindset, when it comes to, interest, I think is important for what happens later. I think as, just business students, we were encouraged to network, and what they say, your network is your net worth.
Right,
so
right.
I don't think that that is exclusive of just students that are not student athletes. I think it's actually even more beneficial for student athletes, because they have individuals, whether it's boosters or people outside of the program that are supportive, that have the means to be able to introduce you to different ways of life maybe you haven't considered before, right?
Because obviously not everybody is, most of athletes are not going to make it professionally.
Correct.
As an athlete in that sport. So most are going to be doing something else. So as you say, it's imperative that you do network and meet people that can, help you when you leave school, and determine or help you with your professional whatever it is, whatever you choose. Now, taking a step back, because I heard that Michigan has now introduced NIL to high schools. So high school athletes are now able to take advantage of their name, image, and likeness. I mean, are we going to start seeing that, explosion of NIL in high school and maybe even middle school athletes? What do you think about that?
Well, I think of, I was always apprehensive to be involved in basketball because I felt like the recruiting happened so young with AAU. And I mean, you are talking about middle school and you are talking about these tournaments in the summer that are going with 8th graders. And so that's not new, right? That is something that's, Nike has put on these major, youth tournaments in the summer, and guys are getting looked at. They're getting recruited, that early. So that makes me nervous for me. And
why?
Just because there is so much responsibility of a student athlete in and of itself. And so, and you're talking about young people that are still developing, right? And whereas I do think that those anomalies, the Kobe's, the LeBrons, the Kevin Garnett's, right, that were straight from high school to the pros, right, that would not have happened had they not perfected their craft. But there's also some genes involved, right? There was something unique about each and every one of them that had to be developed at the same time. So thankfully they were developed, right? And they did have people around them that were able to nurture their talent and help them turn into brands that, like I said, are worldwide brands. But that's not the norm, right? The norm is, I think, for a lot of young people to only hyper-focus on the sport. And what does that do for the whole child, right? And if that's, again, that kid's desire, and again, the parent structure or the familial structure is there to support, that child going through those phases with but I love this and I want to keep doing it and I don't mind the practice, I don't mind the work, then I think it can work. But so often I find that the money and the opportunity that lies at the business of it falls into the laps of families that aren't, and kids that aren't ready for it. Yeah. And so again, it can be a very meteoric rise, and you can fizzle out fast.
Well, is it dissimilar to Jennifer Capriati or in tennis or Tiger Woods? And I mean, all of these other sports had and have had the opportunity to take advantage of your talents at a very early age. But if we look at the sports that didn't or don't allow that, you take a look at the sports that do and the sports that don't, and take a look at what's the difference.
Oh, well, let me ask you, what do you think the difference? I think, you can point to possibly the socioeconomic aspects of the players in those sports, or the participants in those sports. And again, I think that goes back to the familial structure and the reason why you're playing it, right? The reason why do you have to play, or is this something that you enjoy playing? So I go back. I think play is something that we take for granted in this professional sense. We are still talking about a game, and there's a lot of millions. I'm not trying to trivialize or minimize the economic impact that professional sports and even amateur sports have. Amateur, we call it collegiate sports, or even youth sports right. At this point, right? But what I'm saying is that, again, if that has been your sole focus and you do not have a person that you can trust that has some business experience, even if it's limited, if let's say, Venus and Serena Williams, their father and mother's business experience had a lot to do with the father's mindset, right? And also the mother's experience in collegiate sports herself, and a father's experience and just working in the world. So they were very astute to just the economics of what they need to do to be successful and set a path for their girls to do that, right?
Welcome back. Thank you for joining us again. We're here with Kristin Campbell of 40 SEG. group, who is a sports business lawyer, and we've been discussing all things athletics, including her career as an NFL agent, NIL and the changing landscape and what that's going to do. And we were discussing, I guess, the differences in the sports that have traditionally allowed for athletes to take advantage of their NIL, such as golf, tennis, if you want to say, and other sports, and then take a look at the sports that traditionally haven't given a pathway for these athletes to take advantage of the NIL. And I think you discussed the socioeconomic backgrounds, and that being kind of maybe taking a look at that. I'm really interested in figuring out what is the underlying reason why it's been such a struggle to allow, NFL or football players, basketball players, to take advantage of their NIL, their name, image, and likeness at an early age, whereas it hasn't been in golf, tennis, and those other sports.
So one, I will say that what I call the country club sports, right? Tennis, golf, even soccer, right? There are barriers to entry. Like, there are not many country clubs. There's some near Liberty City, but you got to cross over 95 and have a membership and then, pay for all that, or have someone pay for that for you. So the financial barriers of entry to get into those sports, I think, are great. Also, too, the number of people in those sports, golf, tennis, and are it's you, or at the most you've got mixed doubles or doubles, right? To play in tennis and golf, it's, unless you're playing like the Ryder Cup or some team event, it's you at the tee. And so your brand is more focused because you are the focus, right? Versus a team sport, and especially like NFL, where you have a helmet on and you're a number and a position. So the differentiation and brand is harder to make unless you're something like a quarterback or a skill position like a running back, wide receiver, where you're getting your name called because you're able to score touchdowns, or you're a DN that's sacking the quarterback, many times a game. So the ability to get your name out there and to succeed, because for me, the root of sport is winning, right? And so if you're, let's say, Tiger Woods was not embraced in the beginning.
Right.
And it was because, again, who let you in, right? And I think that, I give his father, Earl Woods, so much credit for protecting his son, first and foremost, at least from the stories that I've heard about him, and in those environments that were not welcoming. But even when they're not welcoming, the equalizer was Tiger was winning. You could not deny his ability. You could deny everything else. You could say, we don't want you here, which had happened to him early in his career. But winning changed all of that. So, you're able to see that in individual sports. And with team sports, you have to, it's like you're fighting. I think the culture of the NFL in particular is such that it's very much a next man up culture. And so it's hard to really focus on taking, well, it can be. It can be hard to focus on the, I guess, the winning, because it's dictated upon other people. If like I said, if you're not one of those skill positions, and which means it's a little more difficult to stand out. But that's why I say, you have to find something outside of your sport brand in order to get people to invest in. We want to see more of that. Right. And I think with social media, this generation sees that, because they have a generation of influencers that, like, athletes have always been influencers. That's why they were selling Wheaties and they were selling all these products before. But now they're seeing individuals that don't have a platform, like they've created their own platform. Right. And I think that they are more receptive and understanding, like, I have different talents and interests, and I have a bigger platform immediately, which you didn't ask me, but I like I said, that to me is probably the most exciting. Thank you. The most exciting part about NIL is that players really have the opportunity to become like these independent contractors. Like, Messi to me is starting that is the trend, right? And it's you have to be great first. And
Yeah.
I'm not saying you have to be Messi, but I'm just saying you have to
The greatest.
You have to be great, right?
Right.
You have to win, right? You have to have a track record of winning, which he has done. And outside of America, most people know who Messi is, or if you're, in North America and you follow
They're starting
football,
to get to know.
right? We're starting to get to know him. But he is a world-class international athlete. But he has positioned himself and built his business as a athlete influencer, right? So you look at the deal that he did with Inter Miami, and a lot of it was like it involved media, it involved
he's getting shares through I guess, or he's getting paid through Apple streaming and how many people watch it, and he also has all these different incentives that are outside of just Inter Miami paying him. They've brought in like other partners.
Because Inter Miami, so let's take a step back, because now I don't $1 million is a lot of money, right? I know some people are like, oh, it's just $1 million. I don't feel that way. I feel like $1 million is $1 million. But the fact of the matter is, Inter Miami could not pay Messi what he was worth, right? And so he had to take on these contingencies, right? And again, they're substantial. Apple is not, a startup, right? Apple is is on that level, international company, and they have to market internationally. So I say that to say, whereas we know how much he's getting from Inter Miami, we really don't know how much he stands to make with the Apple deal, because it's not a set number.
Right.
Meaning his worth is not tied to, he's betting on himself. He's betting on his brand. Messi is the most, I guess, he has the most intellectual property marks for an athlete in the world. Right?
I didn't know that.
It's in the hundreds,
Wow.
if I'm not mistaken. And so he's saying, I'm controlling what I put out there. I'm going beyond just putting content, because every time he scores a goal, honestly, every time he's just at the game these days, because that's a kind of hit or miss right now. And I know the NBA has the same problem with sitting players and like people coming to town to just see them in the uniform and play in their town. But he's saying, okay, Apple, every time my name is going to appear in an advertisement, people are going to come and sign up. He's saying, okay, and when they do, I'm going to have some sort of apparatus with one of these, intellectual property, one trademark. Let's say it's the logo that he has, or let's say it's a tagline that he has. And I'm going to plug that into something so I can sell that, while at the same time you're going to promote it because I'm going to be there. So I say that to say the number is infinite, right? But it's infinite because of the brand building he's done
Throughout
up until this point, right? And so why I keep stressing the importance of brand. Most people might not get to Messi status.
I was going to say, yes. So, let's say my son, I hope he does become Messi or even greater, right? But Kwame may not become Messi, and he may have his talents elsewhere. How can that athlete or that person best prepare themselves for after their athletic career finishes, whether they make it to college and it's after college they have to transition, or they play overseas? Until then.
And I think that's the problem that a lot of student athletes make. They wait until it's almost done, right? They wait until to create the plan as they're in decline, right? So this is hypothetical because I don't know the exact parts, but I would say if it were an actual marketing plan, it'd be genius, because it is setting up the ending in the beginning. And it's Travis Kelce, right?
Okay.
And Travis Kelce has been in the league, 8-9 years or so? And so Travis Kelce's also won now 3,
right?
But 3 Super Bowl rings. But prior to the 3, he had reached the mountaintop at least twice. And so, excuse me, he had reached the mountaintop at least twice before. And so he is on his way to Hall of Fame status. But let's keep in mind the numbers, right? The Super Bowl is the biggest event in football, right? And I think it's 123 million viewers. Well, if you compare that to soccer or cricket, we're talking about billions of viewers, right? So it's a drop in the bucket as far as his exposure to an audience, right? It's massive. His exposure is massive, but
it doesn't compare to the
it
worldwide
does not
sports.
compare to worldwide. And so a lot of players have to figure out how to broaden their audience. So when they're done with the football and it's like, okay, what do I do next? It's like, well, what did you do before? Oh, I'm a football player. Which one? Was the first one the real football or American football, right? And then, so what did you do? And if you're not a Hall of Famer, if you're not, a potential, the Tom Brady or the marquee player in the league, what do you do? So I would argue that, like I said, Travis was a great player, but he was not on that level until, he happened to meet a young lady named Taylor Swift. And I'm not saying that this was the plan. I have absolutely no idea. But if I were working with that group, I would say, we need to find someone to partner with that is, has a different audience than you. Right? Who can introduce you to people that we were probably going to be talking to afterwards because you have interest in, they do a podcast together. It's, he's from the Midwest, family's important. But how do we tap into women that don't watch football, that are going to help you to transition to maybe commentating or whatever, and they have an automatic light for you. And we can also, promote you to other companies like, hey, this is the audience I'm bringing. And so
it's a win-win for the NFL, right?
Let's just take a look at what it did for Travis, right? So he has a lovely girlfriend that happens to be an international superstar. And so I'm sure they have a great time together. They are enjoying their courtship, and I'm rooting for them. But for him, and we'll talk about her in a second, but for him, he now has young girls who had absolutely no interest of looking at right, not just the NFL, but looking at a young man like that, like, oh my gosh, I could have that too. Because think of the audience is not just young girls that, have fathers that watch the NFL, but young girls who see themselves as kind of, I hate to say the anti-Beyonce, but not the glamorous head cheerleader, ultra successful. That's like the archetype of a Taylor Swift, right? She's the neighborhood roundaway girl who's all-American girl, right? And now she's got an all-American guy, right?
It's a great story.
It's a wonderful story, right? But for Travis in particular, it now says he has been able to show the softer side of himself. He has been able to show he can be a supportive. He's going right down that I am an advocate for women. And so regardless of if they equate him to football or not, they have some idea of, I think I know this person and I think I like this person. So if I see him again, I'm going to pay attention a little bit longer. If he's selling something that I might have interest, I might purchase it. And so now his trajectory for his future is taken off, and he hasn't even retired yet. He hasn't even talked about retirement yet, but that has begun the steps. So going back to your son, it might not be a international superstar he's going to marry, right? But I will say, what kind of partnerships and relationships does he have, or will he have, that he develops in high school and college that will end up changing the course of his life? So it could be, he meets a young kid at a children's hospital while playing in a bowl game. And he's like, you know what? This matters to me because I've once had a struggle, whatever it might be. And he decides, you know what? I'm going to take up the brand of philanthropy. And because my family gave back and I saw how important it was, and I want to be a part of that. And he starts early. Right. He can start raising money for charities when he gets, walking and talking age, right? So there's different things that you can do, but my point is, don't start at the end.
Yeah, right. So, craft your story. And I didn't think that my podcast would ever mention Taylor Swift, but here we are. Breaking new ground here, So, we've had a great discussion, and I wish we could go on, all day. We probably could talk all day about so many different aspects of sports and what you're doing and how you would advise, these athletes to best position themselves. So I thank you for joining us today on the podcast, and you've really enlightened our audience. We always have one tradition that we do, and that the previous guest asked the question for our next guest. Okay. So your question is, if there was one turning point in your life that you could identify, what was it, and what did you learn from it?
I think it happens a lot, but not too often, but enough. But I think whenever I have failed at something, right? I think the first time I experienced like failure where it was like I'm not satisfied was trying out for cheerleader in the 7th grade. And then, even as far as, not, I guess like I mentioned, just the struggle of law school in the beginning. And so, failure, adversity, whatever you call it, I feel like in those moments I was able to kind of take a step back and really look at not necessarily why is this moment happening, but what does it say about me? Why am I having such a visceral reaction to not being able to succeed, and what am I going to do with it? One of my favorite books is The 4 Agreements, and one of the tenets of the 4 Agreements is to not take things personally. And so, in those moments where, like I said, I'm faced with, I put my, blood, sweat, and tears, and I gave it my all, and I did not get the result that I wanted. Do I decide to take it personally and say, oh, it's this person and that person, and it was against me, and whatever happened, or do I say, all right, how do I pivot? How do I shift? And I'd like to think that, in those moments of, and I'm just going to call it failure because that's what it feels like in the moment. I have decided it is a moment to stop, reflect, and decide, how do we keep going and how do we keep going better?
Amazing. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And if you had one question you would ask for our next guest, what question would you want them to answer?
This is a question I would ask that I actually ask my clients when we're not just getting to know each other, but I'm trying to understand how to position them with the end in mind. But why? Why do you do this? What motivates you to get out of bed and work harder than anybody? What is your why?
What is your why? All right, I like that. Well, thank you for joining us, Ms. Kristin Campbell of 40 SEG, and it has been an amazing conversation with you. I hope that wherever you go from here in your NFL agent sports and business journey takes you to the moon. I see you going very, very far, further than you've already been, and becoming a household name. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Kweku.